The wind came first, long before the storm showed its teeth. It crawled through the moors like a restless spirit, rattling shutters and hissing through keyholes, warning every soul along the Cornish coast that the sea was hungry again. By nightfall, Polwithan Cove was nothing but thunder and foam. The cliffs shuddered as waves rose black and gleaming beneath them, striking like fists of water against stone. Inside a small, weather-beaten cottage that clung to the edge of that furious world, a single lantern burned, dim and steady, like a heart that refused to go out. Elspeth Grey tended it the way some women tended prayers. She was 30 years old, perhaps a little more, her face pale as tide-worn marble, and her hair dark as the peat smoke curling up her chimney. A widow these 2 winters past, she lived alone now, if you could call a woman and her dog alone. The sea had taken her husband, and left her the cottage, the ghosts, and the endless sound of waves. That night she had been mending a torn shawl by the fire when the first crash came, wood splintering, faint and distant but distinct even through the wind. Bran, her old black hound, lifted his head from the hearth and growled low. Elspeth froze, listening. Then came another crash, nearer this time, followed by a shout, faint, then swallowed by thunder. Her heart thudded. A wreck. She was on her feet in an instant, pulling on her cloak, snatching the lantern from the hook by the door. "Stay," she told Bran, though the dog whined in protest as she opened the door and stepped into the storm. The wind hit her like handfuls of gravel. The path down to the shore was slick, narrow, and steep, carved into the cliffside long before her time. Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat she saw it. A ship dashed against the rocks below, its mast snapped clean, its sails thrashing like torn wings. Men clung to wreckage in the surf, their shouts snatched away by wind. Another flash, and then darkness. Elspeth half ran, half slid down the path, mud clinging to her skirts. The smell of salt and pitch filled her lungs. When she reached the shingle, the waves came to her knees, freezing, furious. The sea was thick with debris, barrels, broken planks, a splintered oar. And there, a shape moving where the surf broke hardest, rolling toward her like driftwood. She ran forward, the lantern swinging wildly. It was a man. He was face down, his coat heavy with water, his hair plastered black against his neck. A pistol hung from his belt, and gold rings gleamed faintly on his fingers, too fine for a fisherman, too dangerous for a gentleman. "Saints preserve us," she whispered, brushing the sand from his face. He groaned, barely conscious. His breath came ragged. She looked up at the cliffs. There was no one else, only the storm. Elspeth was not a woman who took risks, but she had learned long ago that the sea gave you no choices, it only gave you moments. She took his arm, heaved him upright, and half dragged, half carried him up the beach. The path home seemed longer than ever, the rain heavier with each step, but somehow she reached the door. Inside, she dropped him onto the floor by the fire. He was bleeding still, a deep gash across his temple. She fetched clean cloth, water and rum, working by instinct. She had done this before, in other storms, for men the tide had spat back half dead. When she pressed the cloth to his wound, he flinched, his hand shooting up to grip her wrist, strong, startlingly quick for a man near drowning. "Where?" he rasped, voice hoarse, eyes blinking open. "You're safe," she said softly. for now. His gaze flicked about the room, taking in the hearth, the spinning wheel, the shadows. Then it found her. Who are you? Someone who pulled you from the sea. That'll have to do. He released her wrist, coughing hard. When she offered him rum, he drank like a man tasting life again. His eyes were green, sharp, unsettling, too clear for a half-drowned soul. The dog growled low beside the fire. "You've a fierce guard," the stranger said, voice rough but edged with humor. "She bites strangers," Elspeth replied, "and you are that." The man smiled faintly, or tried to. "Then I'll not stay long. That's best for both of us." He leaned back against the wall, breathing steady now, watching her with the calm of someone who'd seen death often enough to not mind its company. The storm raged on through the night, but neither slept. When dawn came, gray, cold, and heavy, Elspeth stepped outside to find the beach littered with wreckage. No survivors, no bodies, just a single crate washed up on the tide. She pried it open. Inside, under soaked straw, gleamed bolts of silk, fine, foreign, and forbidden. She stared at it a long moment before closing the lid again. When she returned to the cottage, the stranger was awake, sitting by the hearth with her blanket around his shoulders. He looked steadier now, the color returning to his face. "Your ship," she said quietly, "wasn't a trader's, was it?" He smiled without warmth. "Depends who's asking." "I pulled a box of French silk from the shore, enough to hang you." "Then best you tell no one you found it, nor me." "I'll have not the king's men sniffing about my door." "Nor I," he said, looking up at her. "So perhaps we've a reason to keep each other's secrets." His tone was too easy, too smooth. There was danger beneath it, the kind that came wrapped in charm. "What's your name?" He hesitated, then said, "Elias. Elias Trenwith." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it did. Too measured, as if he'd tried others before. "You'll be gone by nightfall," she told him. He nodded. "If I can walk by then?" But she knew he wouldn't. The wound on his head was deep, and his shoulder had begun to swell. He'd need another day, maybe two. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving a bruised sky and a hush over the cove. Elspeth stood at the doorway, watching the waves. Behind her, Elias stirred. "You've lived here long?" he asked. "All my life," she said. "And you?" "All the places I shouldn't have," he said with a faint grin. She looked over her shoulder, met his eyes. Something in them had softened, the edge dulled by exhaustion or gratitude. She couldn't tell which. He said quietly, "If I live through this, I owe you more than thanks." She turned back to the sea. "I'll take silence instead." They stayed like that a while, two strangers bound by the same tide, the same silence. Outside, the last of the waves hissed across the stones, retreating into the dark. And somewhere deep below, in the drowned black heart of the sea, the wreck of his ship settled into its grave, along with the names, the cargo,
and the sins that would soon come back to find them both.
The storm had passed, leaving the world drenched and gleaming. The cliffs still smoked with mist, and the air held that bruised scent of salt and lightning that comes after ruin. Dawn came slow and pale over Polwithin Cove, as if uncertain whether to trust the morning. From the small window of her cottage, Margaret Trelawney watched the sea breathe against the rocks, each wave sighing as though spent from the night's fury. Elias Trenwith had not stirred for hours. He lay where she had left him, wrapped in coarse blankets near the hearth, his wounds cleaned, his fever broken. She had stripped the salt-stiff shirt from his back the night before, seen the scars that crisscrossed his shoulder, not the marks of labour, but of whips and blades. Even in sleep there was a restlessness in him, as though his dreams kept to the same perilous tides he sailed by. Now, with the daylight pressing timidly through the shutters, he opened his eyes. "Am I dead?" he asked, voice hoarse but threaded with dry humour. "Not yet," she said, pouring him water, "though I'd not call you safe." He drank, the tremor in his hand betraying exhaustion more than fear. "Safe," he repeated, softly. "That's a word I never much cared for." Margaret stood it in silence, the unshaven jaw, the streak of sea-salted hair fallen across his brow, the trace of French on his tongue when he spoke. There was a grace to him that no fisherman possessed, something dangerous and magnetic. When he caught her gaze, she looked away, busy in herself with the pot on the fire. "Your ship?" she asked. He hesitated. "Gone to splinters, and the men with it, save for me." "What were you carrying?" Another pause, then, "Hope," he said, with a faint smile. "And contraband." Margaret said nothing. In Cornwall, every family along the coast had some small pact with the smugglers. A keg of French brandy traded for silence, a roll of lace carried under a cloak to Truro market. But she knew from the look in his eyes that Elias's work was darker, and that whatever shore the tide had brought him to tonight would not remain peaceful long. By the next evening he was strong enough to stand. She found him outside at dusk, the sea wind catching his hair, the last light burning red across the horizon. The tide had turned, and the gulls screamed low over the water. In the cove below, a small boat waited, hidden among the rocks. "You're leaving," she said quietly. "I should," he answered, not turning, "but the wind's against me, and I've work yet to do." She followed his gaze. The boat was narrow, tarred black, built for speed and secrecy. A lantern covered in oilcloth gave off only the faintest glow. Beside it, a man stood half in shadow, waiting, no fisherman, by the look of his fine coat. "You've risked your life for cloth?" she asked. "What profit could be worth such cost?" Elias smiled faintly. "Cloth can be power, Mistress Trelawney. The right silk on the right shoulders can shift a court's loyalty faster than any sword." Then he turned, eyes meeting hers in the dim light. "You'll see it yourself if you come below at the next low tide." And so,
Curiosity stronger than fear, she did.
That night, beneath the moon, thin as a blade, Elias led her along a narrow path carved into the cliff face. The tide had withdrawn, leaving pools of silver light between black stones. He carried a lantern, and its glow threw ghostly reflections across the slick rock walls. At the base of the cliff, hidden behind a curtain of seaweed and rock, lay a small hollow, a cave no larger than a church vestry, dry and dark but for the flicker of his flame. There, stacked like treasure in a pirate's dream, lay bales of silk and lace, barrels of French wine, and crates branded with foreign sigils. Margaret drew in a sharp breath. "Saints preserve us!" "Contraband," he said quietly. "Brittany silk and Burgundy wine, the best on this coast and the most hunted." He moved closer, brushing the dust from one crate to reveal the carving of a fleur-de-lis burned into the wood. "Every night the sea allows, we bring 'em across. We land 'em here, hide 'em until the tide turns, and move them up through the moors. There are eyes everywhere, king's men, customs riders, but gold and silence keep the path clear." "You trust me with this?" she asked. "I trust the tide," he said, "and the look in your eyes." Margaret touched one of the silk bolts. Even in the dimness, it shimmered, deep indigo, shifting to silver like trapped moonlight. She had never seen such beauty. The fabric whispered under her fingers, lighter than air, forbidden and exquisite. In that moment, she understood why men would risk the gallows for it. In the days that followed, Elias did not leave. The sea remained too rough, the patrols too close. Margaret found herself drawn into the rhythm of his world, the coded knocks on the door after midnight, the scent of salt and wine that clung to his coat, the quiet command in his voice when danger brushed near. He paid for his cape with gold coins older than England's last king, and yet she sensed that money meant little to him. One night, as rain whispered against the windows, she found him sitting at her table, tracing a map with his finger. The lantern light danced across his features, sharp and beautiful in the shadow. "You've been at war," she said. He nodded. "The Crown's War, once, then another's. And now I fight for those who pay in silence." He looked up at her, and something unspoken passed between them. Not quite trust, not yet love, but something raw and perilous. She felt it as surely as the pull of the tide. "I could help," she said suddenly, "carry word to the village, or warn you if riders come." He hesitated, then smiled, not kindly, but with the quiet approval of one who recognizes courage. "You'd make a fine smuggler, Mistress Trelawney." "Call me Margaret," she said. By the next moon she was carrying messages folded in her bodice, harmless phrases that hid roots and tides in their wording. She walked the cliff paths as she always had, basket on her arm, eyes alert for the king's excise-men. To any who saw her, she was only a widow gathering herbs or visiting kin. Only Elias knew that beneath her shawl lay lace worth a noble's ransom. Their partnership became a secret language of glances and half-smiles, of nights spent waiting for the signal light from the sea. He taught her to read the weather, to listen for the rhythm of the surf that meant a landing. She learned quickly. There was power in it, the thrill of risk, the taste of salt on her lips, and the knowledge that she held her own fate for once. And yet danger drew closer. One night, as they loaded casks into a hidden cart, she saw a lantern flare on the far headland. 3 short blinks,
the warning for a cutter offshore. Elias's voice was calm but urgent. They're sweeping north, we've time to hide half, no more. They worked in silence, their breath ghosting in the cold air. When the last crate was buried beneath the cliffside turf, he caught her hand. "You've done more than I should have asked," he said. "If they find this place, you could hang." "So could I," she answered, "yet you stay." Their faces were close, the sea roaring below like blood in her ears. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the warmth of his breath and the wildness in his eyes. Then he kissed her, quick, fierce, tasting of salt and danger. When he drew back, she felt dizzy, both terrified and alive. "Go," he whispered, "before the tide turns against us."
The next days passed in uneasy calm. Word came of a Royal Navy cutter anchored off Fowey, her captain sworn to crush the smuggling trade that bled the crown of its taxes. Margaret felt the tension coil in her chest. Every knock at the door seemed a threat. Still, Elias stayed, though each night he walked the cliffs, watching the horizon. One evening she found him there, the wind pulling at his cloak. "You'll have to run soon," she said. He didn't answer at first. "They'll search every cove within a week, but there's one cargo left unlanded. Silk for London, too fine to lose." "And you mean to bring it in yourself?" she said bitterly. He smiled faintly. "You know me too well." "I wish I did not," she said. The words came out sharper than she meant, but he only looked at her, his eyes soft with something like regret. "Margaret," he said quietly, "if I don't return, then I'll know you were a fool," she interrupted, and turned away, though her hands trembled. He reached for her, fingers brushing her sleeve. "Or you'll know I loved you." The wind swallowed the words, but she heard them all the same. That night she could not sleep. The sea's roar filled her dreams, waves breaking against unseen rocks, lanterns bobbing across the dark. At dawn she climbed the cliff path, skirts heavy with dew. Far out to sea she saw a sail, pale, rising against the new light. 2 ships moved there, one small and quick, the other larger, darker. She knew even from that distance which was his. The first flash of cannon fire was faint, like lightning behind clouds. Then came another. The sound rolled across the water, and the gulls rose into the air, screaming. Margaret stood frozen, the wind tearing her hair across her face. The tide surged below, washing away the last traces of last night's footprints on the sand. When the smoke cleared, only one ship remained, the larger, darker one, turning slowly toward the open sea. She sank to her knees on the wet grass, the cold seeping into her bones, her hands pressed to her chest as if to still her heart. Somewhere in the distance, a lantern flickered once, then vanished, swallowed by daylight. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in thin, relentless threads, soaking the cliffs and turning the narrow paths to mud. In the smuggler's cottage above the cove, the fire hissed and spat, damp logs protesting as if echoing her unrest. The woman sat alone at the edge of the table, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood, the faint outline of a knot she had seen 100 times. But tonight it felt different. Elias had gone before dawn, claiming business at the harbour. She had watched him ride away, cloak snapping behind him, the sound of hooves fading into the fog. Something in his parting, the brief kiss, the glance that did not linger, left her uneasy. For months they had lived between passion and peril, each night a secret, each dawn a reprieve. But now the shadows seemed to hold more than just wind and whispering sea. When she rose to stoke the fire, the floorboards creaked beneath her step, the same uneven spot near the hearth. It had always tilted slightly underfoot, but never before had she noticed the faint outline of a square carved into the wood. Her breath caught. With trembling hands she lifted the small iron poker and pried at the seam. The board gave with a sigh. Beneath it lay a leather-bound ledger, its cover worn, edges blackened by years of hidden damp. She hesitated, listening. The wind pressed against the shutters, rain drummed on the roof. Alone. Slowly she opened it. The ink was faded but legible, pages upon pages of names, numbers, and notes written in Elias's hand. Dates matched the nights of their landings, the deliveries, the bribes. At first it seemed like a record of trade, until she saw her own name. Her heart stuttered. Next to it, in the same steady hand, a note. Magistrate's contact, leverage. Her hands shook. The room blurred. She turned the pages faster. More names, secret payments to the crown, exchanges she had never been told about. It wasn't merely smuggling. It was betrayal, layered and deliberate. Elias had not been hunted by the authorities. He had been working with them, or worse, for them. Thunder rolled over the sea. The door burst open. Elias stumbled in, soaked and breathless, the smell of gunpowder and salt thick around him. Blood stained the sleeve of his coat. "What have you done?" she whispered, the ledger still open in her hands. He froze. For a long moment neither moved, the fire crackling between them like a warning. Then his gaze dropped to the book. "You weren't meant to see that." Her throat closed. "So it's true." He took a step forward, slow and measured, his eyes hard now, stripped of tenderness. "You think you understand, but you don't. This isn't about loyalty or love, it's about survival. You know what they would do to us both if they found out." A shout cut through the wind. Another voice, one of his men, outside the door. Panic flickered across his face. "They've found the boat." He reached for her, but she stepped back, clutching the ledger to her chest. "You used me," he said softly, almost pleading. "I saved you." The gunshot shattered the air. The window behind him splintered. Elias staggered once, a dark bloom spreading across his shirt. The next moment he was on the floor, eyes wide with disbelief. Outside, boots thudded through the mud, the magistrate's men calling orders. She sank to her knees beside him, the ledger heavy in her arms. His blood spread across the floorboards, the same boards that had hidden his secrets, the same that had creaked beneath their laughter. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened. Only the ledger remained, its ink smudged by tears and blood, the story of their love written in lies and silence. The hangman's moon hung swollen above the cliffs, pale and pitiless, washing the Cornish coast in cold silver light. The wind had risen again, howling through the caves where the tide smashed against black stone. Lanterns swung wildly below. The excisemen had found the cove. Elias Dre ran through the wet sand, pistol in hand, the tang of salt and smoke in his lungs. Around him chaos reigned, smugglers scattering like frightened gulls, barrels rolling into the surf, shouts breaking through the roar of the sea. He looked up through the fog and saw her, the woman he loved, standing at the mouth of the cave, frozen, her gown whipping in the wind. "Go," he shouted, "thou trap here if you wait." She hesitated, eyes wide, the moonlight catching the tears on her face. Behind her the shouts drew closer. "By order of the crown!" Voices that meant death. He reached her just as a musket fired. Sand burst at their feet. Elias seized her wrist and pulled her up the narrow cliff path, hearts pounding in rhythm with the waves below. At the summit they stopped, both breathless, their faces ghostly in the moonlight. The sea raged beneath them, a black mirror of what they'd become. He turned to her, and in her trembling silence the truth finally surfaced. "You told them," he said softly. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then a whisper, fragile, desperate. "They would have killed me, Elias. I didn't want to." "I know. You did what you had to." From his coat he drew the small leather ledger, the smuggler's code book, inked with every name, every route, every sin. He pressed it into her hands. "Take it," he said. "You'll need it more than I ever will." Below the torches grew brighter, the men shouting his name. He turned from her toward the edge of the cliff, the moonlight spilling across his face. "Go," he said again, voice low but firm. The waves crashed louder, as if the sea itself demanded its due. She reached out for him, but he was already stepping into shadow. The last thing she saw before the night swallowed him was his coat whipping in the wind, and the pale light of the hangman's moon burning on the water below. The sea was calm now, too calm, as though it mourned what it taken. Months had passed since that night beneath the hangman's moon. The cove slept again under the weight of mist and memory, and the woman who once braved its tides now lived quietly in the cottage above it. Her hair, once the color of chestnuts in firelight, was streaked with white. The world had gone on, markets, sermons, the gossip of fishermen. Yet in her cottage by the sea, time stood still. The ledger lay hidden beneath the hearthstone, wrapped in oilcloth, untouched. She had not opened it since the night Elias vanished into the dark. Some evenings, when the wind turned inland and the gulls were silent, she could still hear the sea whispering his name. Then, one grey morning, a small parcel washed ashore, tangled in seaweed near the rocks. She found it herself while walking the tide line. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth, lay a single piece of contraband silk, midnight blue, embroidered with golden thread in the shape of his initials. The fabric shimmered faintly in the pale light, smelling of salt and smoke.
Rumours came and went like the tide. Some said Elias Dray had been talking in France and hanged under another name. Others swore he'd kerned privateer, hunting the very ships he once traded with. She listened, but never spoke, her expression unreadable. At dusk, she still walked to the cliffs. The lantern she carried was the same one that had once guided him home through storms. Each evening she set it upon the window-sill, the small flame trembling against the dark. A signal meant for no one, yet she lit it all the same. When the wind rose, she'd close her eyes and swear she could hear him. His laugh carried faintly through the crashing surf, the whisper of his boots on the stones. The tide reached for the rocks below, restless and eternal, like the heart that still waited above. And so the light burned on night after night, a beacon for a ghost, or perhaps for love itself, forever watching the sea.